Good evening, Miss Young here. I'm going to go through in this playlist an AQA question, although what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and make it a little bit more generic and go through it in a number of different ways, taking it through both AQA OCR all the way through to Cambridge, which will do things slightly differently, and then taking it from GCSE level to a more A-level type approach. So this first video, I'm going to deal with it in Python, and I'm going to go through a number of ways that it could be done with GCSE AQA, and then I'm going to look at C#, Java and VB.NET, and then I'm not going to look at Pascal or Delphi. I don't think there are enough people out there that it would interest. This first video is going to contain just what I would call question 1, 2, 3 and 4. This actual question was written as part of a 20-hour question whereby you were required to not only just write the code but also to do the analysis, the design, the testing, a full write-up. And of course, I'm not going to do that, but I am going to try and imagine that I have done some of that. So the reason why that's important is because when we look at the whole code, there are a whole host of different ways that we could do this. And having looked at the whole code, it's important that we try and make sure that we do it in the best way possible. But I'm going to start by doing it in a very, very basic GCSE format. And so the first part of the question, other than the menu, deals with inputting this data from a CSV file, and here's a copy of the CSV file. Now of course, if we're in Cambridge, they wouldn't do it as a CSV file. They would have it on separate lines like this, and we will do that on another day. But for the moment, I'm going to do this based on AQA. And so we're going to need some form of data structure, and as I said, we're going to try and go with the easiest way first, and that's just simply whenever we see a table like this, the first thing that jumps to my mind is a two-dimensional array, and this is what we would call the airports. So I'm just going to say airports, and I'm just going to create an empty array, or in Python at least, a list, and I'm just going to write this as part of the main program. So let's actually have a look at question 1. Question 1 says the program should read the comma-separated file airports. Now it doesn't say you should read it and save it, but it seems to me that that is what is required. Otherwise it would make no sense. So what I'm going to do to make sure this is nicely decomposed is to create a function, or in this case a procedure, because we're using a global variable here. So I'm going to call it, let's call it read airports. Could be get airports, it doesn't really matter. And we're not sending it any parameters. And what do we need to do? Well, we know that the file name is airports.txt. We don't need to send anything, so we can just say something like file equals open, and it's airports.txt, and we want to open that for reading. Now, because we're going to be amending the global array airports, we ought to make sure that we set this to be a global. Now, once we have this file open, then we want to, if we have a look at a CSV file, we want to read this line, and read this line, and read this line, and then this line. And we can do that in Python quite simply by saying for line in file, and that will read through each line in the text file. And for the moment, I'm just going to print line so we can see what is happening, and I'll just finish off to make this neat. And so if we run this now, what we'll see is nothing, and the reason is because we need to call read airports. And so what we can see is that it's printing each line out, but we seem to be having a space in between, and that's because at the end of every file, an invisible \n exists, which causes the editor to move to the new line. So we need to strip that. So what I want to do is I'm just going to call it stripped line, because we are stripping the line, and that's going to be at line dots. Now if we just do strip on its own, it will strip all non-visible characters, or if we want, we can just say I only want to strip \n, so we can just leave it at that. And then if we then try to print strip line, we can see now that all of the spaces have gone. So now we have each of these in an array. Sorry, not an array yet, simply have them with a thing. So now we want to convert the stripped line into an array. So we can say that the airport is equal to an airport, we call it airport data, is equal to stripped line, and we can use the splits, and that will split it into an array based upon a delimiter, and the delimiter we have is a comma. So let's have a look now when we do airport data. If we print that now, and we can see that we have an array of each line is an array. Now what's important though is that this number here, which should be an integer, is a string, because it's simply taking this string and splitting it. So we'll have to deal with that at a later time, but for now we can live with that. So all I need to do now is to simply say airports and append the airport data. And now if I just come down to here and just print airports, we should hopefully have a nice two-dimensional array. You can see the two open square brackets with one finishing here with a comma, and so we can see that we now have a very straightforward two-dimensional array. So that deals with, for the moment, this particular line. So what do we need to do next? Well, we want to display a menu allowing the user to select from the following options. So I'm just going to cheat a little, and I'm going to grab these, and again, just to make sure that we decompose, I'm going to call def get menu choice, and the first thing I'm going to do is paste this data in, and it's not as nice and neat as I was hoping for, but I think it saved me a little bit of time. Enterprise planning, calculate profits, and clear data, and quit. So what we can do here now is select these, and now we can select this one as well, and we can do prints, and I want, for now, just going to put one in, and that makes that nice and easy. And I can now simply just change this to be 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we know that 5 is the option to quit. So what we want to do is we want to get a choice, and we can input, for example, select an option, and we don't need to convert it to an integer because we're not going to be doing any maths on it. So we can just say while choice not in, and then we can just do 1 and 2, 3, 4, and 5. So while it's not in any of those options, we want to give a message to say in valid choice, and end while. And so now that should force us to print enter either 1, 2, 3 or 4. So again, we can call get menu choice, and we need to return the choice. So we need to say here return the choice. And so let's see what happens now. So we can see the data, we haven't got rid of that. If I select 7, it says invalid option. If I go, and that's another reason why it's useful not to do a conversion to int, because otherwise I would need to use a try or a catch, and I can choose 1, and you can see that that works just fine. So I'm just going to remove the print airport, and the thing is that we're going to want to keep doing this on a number of occasions. So we really want a repeat loop because we want to do it at least once, but I'm going to fudge that by just saying that the choice is an empty string, and then we can say that while choice is not equal to 5, and remember this is a string 5, then what we want to do is get the menu choice. Now of course here would be a perfect time for a case, but we don't have our case or select, so we're simply going to have to say if choice is equal to 1, then we want to do something, and if choice is equal to 2, then we want to do something, and 3 dots here just allow you to Python not to complain, and we don't need an else in this particular case because the else will be 5, and if it's 5 it's going to come back to here, and that will be the end. So I'm going to put an end while here, and so we've done that. And if the user selects quit, then a suitable message. So if they press quit, and then I'm just going to have an end if here. If they press quit, they're going to say something like print goodbye from the airport's task. So now if I run this again, enter that, enter 8, enter 1, it's going to do nothing, enter 2, and if I enter 5, it's going to say goodbye from the airport's task. So we've completed part 1, part 2, part 3, and now we're going to move on to part 4. So this is the enter airport details. So again, I want to create a method, and I'm going to call it enter details, okay, or enter airports. Okay, so def enter airports, and what do we need to do? We need to, so the user should be asked to enter a 3-letter. The code is not for Liverpool, return after a message, then enter the overseas airports, check that it's valid based upon the data, should be displayed, and if the code for the overseas airport is not valid, then a suitable error should be displayed. Okay, so we are going to be using a global variable, the airport, but because we're not going to be changing it, we don't need to make it global. So the first thing it asks us to do is to enter the 3-letter code. So first thing it wants to do is not print. We want to input enter the 3-letter UK code, and again we sometimes would use a while, but in this particular case it just says to return back if it's not correct. And so with a message, so we can say something like if, and let's just change it to UK airports, if UK airport not in, and we have LPM or BOH. If it's not in that, then we can print invalid, excuse the caps, invalid airport, and we can simply return. No point in using an else if, when we can just use an early return. So that meets the requirements of A and B. So now we want to enter the overseas airport. So we can just take this and we can say overseas airport, enter the 3-letter airport, and let's call it 3-letter overseas airport code, and then that finishes that. Now the user should be asked to enter the 3-letter airport. The program should check the code is valid based on the data read from the CSV file, and if it's valid, full name is printed, otherwise it shall return. So there are a whole host of ways of doing this, but basically what they're asking you to do here is a linear search. Now, had we done this with a dictionary, and I'm going to show you that later on in another video, then this would be a lot easier to complete. However, we haven't. We've got a 2D array, so there are a whole host of different ways that we can do this. I'm going to do it the way that I would like to do it, but we shall see. So I'm going to set an index, and I'm going to send that index to be equal to 0, and I'm going to say that while airports at index, and then that will get us the, let's go and have a look at this. That will get us this row, and we want the 0th column. So we're going to say while the airports at 0 is not equal to the overseas airport, then we're going to increment IDX by 1. And here's the thing, so if we get to the end, IDX will be, in this case we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's index 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So if IDX gets to be 5, then we know that we didn't find it. And what we can do is we can just have a quick look at that by printing IDX, and I will deliberately put one in that doesn't work. And just for testing this out, I'm going to comment this out. It's always important to, when you're trying to test this out, you don't want to do it in whole big chunks. We want to test it in smaller chunks. So if we're testing 1, then we want to say enter airports, and so let's try and run that now, and I want to enter the airport, and so this is the overseas. So we know if I put LKL, doesn't make any sense. You're going to see the list index is out of range. And why is that? Well, airports is, and then of course the reason for that is that and IDX has got to be less than len of airports. And if we try that now, in fact we have to do that the other way round, just because of the way that an and works. And so if we try running this now and enter 1, and I just do LKL, you will see that it simply prints number 5. So obviously if I now try it again with MAD, it prints 2. So what we can do now, knowing that information, we can say that if IDX is equal to the length of airports, then we know it's failed. So we can say prints, just uncomment this out now and just follow this same pattern. Otherwise, we want to now, again, because we've returned, we don't need an else here, so we can print. And we know that IDX is a value, so I'm going to use an, no, I'm going to keep it with basic things, so we could say the selected airport name is, and I'm going to add airports at IDX, and we have no one, so it's the 1th column. So now let's see if we can check that out. So first of all, if we try and put BNH, you'll see it comes back again. Now we can say from Bournemouth, and then we can say to Madrid, and we can see here that it says the selected airport name is that. So we have this working, and all of this now, number 1 is correct, number 2 is correct, number 3 is correct, number 4 is correct. Well, it's not quite correct because, as I said before, we need to be looking ahead, and when we get to 6, we need to be able to say, have we actually selected anything? But I'm going to come back to that. For now, we've managed to complete 1, 2, 3, and 4 out of 7. And number 7 is a relatively straightforward one, so we're almost on the way to completing at least half of this task. And so this is using a 2D array. It's a very basic form for GCSE, and this will work for either OCR, AQA, Edexcel, but as I said before, the airports.txt file would look slightly different for that. So I'm going to come and have a look at that later on. So for the moment, this is Ms. Young. I hope this has been helpful, and in the next video we'll look at how we can modify that for a to make things slightly easier in the long run. Thank you.